Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest. He's the co-founder of Mexicue, Thomas Kelly. My man, are you feeling unstoppable today?
Feeling unstoppable.
Yes, man. I cannot wait to dive into your story, but let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
I think the mantra at Mexicue, the Mexicue mantra, if you will, on success is just that it's, the key is just finding value through and success through collaboration with everyone in the organization.
Dude, I'm so happy you're dropping words like collaboration on me right now. That is one of our core values here at Restaurant Unstoppable.
That's awesome.
And it's one of the biggest lessons I've learned that, like, to make it today, you can't do it alone.
Totally.
You can't look at the restaurants down the street as your competition. I mean, technically, yes, they are. They're jockeying for the same business you are, but you together with those other people will go so much further, and you can share that. You can
Agreed.
share that business.
Agreed. Especially with like the rate at which the landscape is changing right now. You just need to collaborate with people inside the organization and outside the organization in order to find success.
So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I usually don't start pulling back layers this soon, but you got me super interested, man. How do you approach people outside of your organization for collaboration?
I mean, I'm just one of those people who's always eager to have conversations with peers, right? And so, I'm always up for an introduction and always up for a, phone call or in-person meeting under more normal non-COVID circumstances. And just find those, that more often than not, those introductions and those conversations are going to be extremely valuable for me and hopefully for, whoever I'm chatting with as well.
For sure. And one of the things I've noticed is that, like, you only bring to the table so many skills and assets,
sure,
right? But when you start approaching other restaurateurs and other people, you start to realize, oh, wow, like so-and-so, Sally is really great at, fill in the blank.
Yep.
But I'm really great at filling the blank over here. And when we start coming together, we can compensate for our weaknesses and together go much further. Have you picked up on that? Has that happened?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think especially, I don't know if it's different right now in today's, hospitality and restaurant industry world, but it seems that, there are people that are coming from a lot more varied types of backgrounds and not just coming up through culinary school, studying traditional French cooking, and then coming up through a fine dining,
I think
kind
you're
of
a perfect
channel.
example of this, and we're going to get into your backstory, but sorry to cut you short. Keep
No,
going.
mine's definitely not traditional. And, I just find in a lot of the conversations I'm having with folks in the industry that it's just people are finding their way into this world through a lot of different experiences.
Absolutely.
And
For sure. So where does it make sense to start telling your story? I mean, on that note of having different experiences, why don't you just kind of fill the listeners in on who Thomas Kelly was before a restaurateur?
Sure. So I, previous to starting Mexicue, which was just over 10 years ago now, I was working in online marketing in New York City. And so I was working for a small media company doing kind of digital marketing. So kind of getting some exposure into that digital marketing world. And at nights I was working in restaurants and always had a real passion for food, but didn't think of it at the time as something that is a career path necessarily.
So you're working in restaurants. Was that necessary for you to get by, or was this more of like,
No.
I want to be around food?
Oh, no. I was walking into restaurant. I mean, I worked for free for 5 years at nights after my day job in restaurants.
I love that. Let's go back even further though, because I feel like you were working in Boulder, Colorado. Was this before you came to New York?
Yeah. Oh yeah, you want to go way back?
Let's go back, man. I
Cool.
want to find out who we're talking to.
Yeah, I mean, well, going way back. I mean, I just was lucky to be exposed to really good food and scratch cooking and from an early age. So my mom and my grandmother were always like cooking crazy things and from scratch and so at a young age was really exposed to, home cooking.
Okay.
We did not go out to eat a lot.
Do you identify as a chef? I was curious to call you Chef Thomas Kelly or not.
Not really.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. I think of no. I think of I kind of hold that title for people that have maybe gone up through the traditional channel we talked about.
And you can usually tell when somebody has a respect for the trade because they know what it takes. Like if they go through like what is it, 10 years minimum? You have to be working in the industry to to be able? So you're almost at that point, or you just recently passed that point because you've been.
Yeah, I mean, listen, yes. We're past that point, but I also spend my day doing. I mean, a large portion of my day, and we could talk about it, but is filled with creating food and recipes, but but a lot of it isn't.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to use that title.
I hear you.
So anyway, so exposed to food, and became really interested in it at an early age, and was just drawn. I mean, I was in the kitchen cooking at a very young age.
Okay. So as far as operations, business mind, whatever, fill in the blank, where did you evolve the most as far as your knowledge about the restaurant industry? Like what experience sets you up the most in your come up to be successful in this industry?
I mean, just developing a passion for food.
Okay.
For sure. I mean, I think, we'll fast forward at some point to, the structure of our organization today, but I developed that passion for food very early on, and then marketing a little bit later. And, among other things, but those are my two focuses here today at Mexicue.
So what did you focus on in your education? Were you
art history?
Art history. Okay. When did you graduate? Not to date you.
No, not at all. So I went to University of Colorado in Boulder, and finished in 2000.
Which explains the fast casual experience. So in 2000, you were working fast. You weren't at Chipotle, were you?
No, but it was emerging at that time, as obviously Yeah. So So there were a couple really cool Mexican restaurants, so fast casual restaurants, although we didn't call it that at the time, in Colorado, in Denver and Boulder. Illegal Pete's was one, which has now kind of grown quite a bit, and then Chipotle, of course. And so
this was just a job to get by while you were in school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. Yeah, at the time, I started working in a sandwich shop called Presto.
Okay.
And which was also kind of a fast casual type of restaurant in Boulder, and that was in fact a job to help get through college or whatever by textbooks, but also was feeding that itch for cooking a bit too.
So was it not until 2008, 2009 until your previous business partner David approached you and said, or did you approach him?
No, he approached me. Yeah.
Was ever owning a restaurant in the works for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I moved to New York and had studied art history and thought I might work in the art world. That, after I dug into it a little bit, didn't seem to wasn't something I wanted to really pursue, I realized. So jumped into online marketing. And that was a choice I made at the time, like many young people, where, I just moved to New York. I needed a job. I was interested in learning marketing. Wasn't super passionate about it. And, but enjoyed it and worked in that role for several years. And then started working at nights, as I mentioned, kind of staging or doing a sort of, externship type of thing, for several years in some great restaurants around the city. And at that point, I realized I wanted to be doing something professionally in food, but wasn't sure, what that path might be.
Got you. So working for some of these restaurants in New York, were there any key mentors, any key stages that you think you really kind of, without those stages, you wouldn't have had some key skill sets that set you up for success? Was it just about the food at this point?
It was about the food.
Okay.
And so from a culinary, perspective, yes, there was, but from a business perspective,
well, that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So, from a sort of entrepreneurial or business perspective, no, I just wasn't getting, and I'm sure they were there. I just wasn't, I was really in the kitchen.
Maybe subconscious, you're picking up on little
100%.
Processes and flows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What about just culture? Were you picking up on culture and ways to lead a kitchen from looking at these chefs and these restaurateurs?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's definitely a lot that I was seeing that was, things that I viewed as good and things that I viewed as not so good. And these were traditional, fine dining restaurants. And so there's there's a very deep ingrained culture in those places. I happened to work at restaurants where they had great leadership in place and really good culture and values in place. But I also realized one of the things that I took away was that, it's just a really, really hard, deep work ethic with people putting really long hours in the fine dining world, restaurant world. And so for me, I walked away and said, well, it's not good or bad. And, but I walked away saying like, I don't want that for myself, for my culture at Mexicue at some point.
Can you, I know it's been probably at this point like 12 or 13 years, right? Going back, but can you reflect back at some of the great leadership? And can you give me an example, a specific story of when you saw great leadership and what great leadership looks like?
Well,
I really I push here, man.
Yeah, no worries. That's great. I love it. So Marco Canoro was the chef de cuisine at Kraft when I was working there in pastry, and then started Hearth and went over there. And I think, I just saw, he just had all chefs can get riled up occasionally. This guy is just a very, very even temperament. And so, I saw a lot of even in very, very high stress situations, any normal dinner service and those very busy restaurants at the time, I just witnessed a guy who was leading the kitchen and able to keep his cool.
Why is that important?
Well, because the alternative is losing your cool and then, and speaking to people and, yelling at people or doing the sort of like traditionally what people think chefs do in kitchens, the sort of like, whatever, Gordon Ramsay style, like yelling at people, which is just like, that's not good for culture.
Yeah. Fear and control, right? Like,
totally.
Yeah. So why is that bad for culture? I know it seems obvious, but I really try to
pry. I mean, please. I mean, I think, just being on the receiving end of that is not going to make you feel good and not going to make you feel like you're, a valued part of the team, or taken seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, you want to make people feel like they're collaborating with you and that they are cared for and taken care of, and by you need to speak to people with respect in order to make them feel that way.
Do you think you're going to get results out of somebody by screaming in their face and you're going to make them better in that moment? Do you have a different thing?
Short term in the moment, short term maybe, but certainly not in the long term.
I'd argue not even in short term maybe, because they're going to be so up in their head about how much they want to strangle you or kill you or walk in or throw their apron in your face that they're probably just going to mess up again.
Totally.
Because they're not going to be able to focus. Their emotions are going to take over. It's just so thank you for getting into those details. I think you really spelled it out well. What about values? You said there were some great values. What were some of the big values that you picked up through working at some of these great restaurants?
Well, that's a little bit of a tough one for me because I was not, I was there in a very part-time capacity. And so I was just not, super, super involved in the culture of the restaurant. I was sort of dipping in and out at night and sort of observing from afar. But, we started off by talking about collaboration. I mean, I think, all of these restaurants did a really good job of extracting, creativity and value from the whole kitchen team.
What was the approach? How would these chefs, these restaurateurs, engage their team in a way to encourage them to contribute? Was there a structure put around this, or
giving them? I think giving them creative autonomy to kind of come up with, make decisions on altering dishes or coming up with new dishes and taking those kind of risks.
Yeah, and I think that's really key too. I mean, it's just the power of we talked about earlier, like collaboration. Like you are only so good by yourself, but when you open up the channels to your mind to other minds, you're literally compounding the potential energy you have.
Yes.
And we cut ourselves short when we try to control the menu or try to control even the creating systems and processes or even developing the culture.
Sure.
When you break down those barriers and you open that up to that potential energy, it's like the sky's the limit. Like
agreed.
It's a very powerful approach. What about what not to do? I love asking like the lessons you've learned, the things you observed of what people did that you're like, wow,
yeah,
that's not going to be me when it's my turn.
I think the work-life balance in sort of traditional fine dining restaurants is really tough. And, we go into the reasons for that, but I think that's probably irrelevant. But it's, I think that's just sort of not, when you've got people working so much of their life and not able to like separate work from their personal life and take the time that they need to, rest and reflect and recharge. Yeah. It's just not setting up, a sort of sustainable, scalable.
Yeah.
Did
I cut you short?
No.
So I agree 100%. And it's weird because I sit in this position where I get to make an example of successful people, and to make it in this industry, or to at least to have the perception of making it in this industry. I've noticed to what you're saying, that like, should I really be making an example of these people? Have these people really figured it out?
Right.
Or are they just projecting this image of, we're the best and like all's good, but internally, like at home and like emotionally and,
right.
Physical health and all that, like emotional health, like, are these people we want to aspire to be like?
Sure.
It's a real question, an inner dialogue that I have to be like, should I be promoting these people and what they
Sure.
do? Like,
fascinating.
So what are your thoughts when I say that?
Well, I agree. I mean, to me, in my mind, it's, I think that is doable over in a short term. I mean, I think you see a lot of these restaurateurs and teams sort of, racing and just grinding it out, and it's just going to lead to burnout.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just a sustainable, long-term, viable approach.
Well, I think this is why it's so important for us to have conversations, because like, I talked to literally like the best restaurants in the most successful, biggest cities out there. And from the outside looking in, they're having like, G Crew, like Food and Wine, like all these like publications, these awards, James Beard, Michelin stars, but they're barely making payroll.
Right.
And it's like, what are we doing? Why are we celebrating this?
100%.
Like, we need to take a few steps back and really start to like, set new standards.
Agreed.
Well, I mean, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Maybe we can reflect on what those standards look like in the future. But at what point, take us to the point where your past business partner, David, say his name for me? Shalace. He approaches you, like, take us to that point.
Well, I remember it very well. I mean, we were friends and still are friends, and both working in corporate day jobs, and over the course of like years had talked about, both of us being interested in starting our own business, me specifically in food, and he was not so sure at the time. And he had been spending some time in LA. I think he actually had one specific trip where he had, actually sort of visited and seen this food truck, part of the fabric of the culture of LA, and thought it was, an intriguing idea for New York.
Okay.
And so that started the conversation. This was like early, January, February 2010.
Okay. You're just getting into the story of how David approached you. So you were definitely, I did a little bit of research. I knew that he knew that you were crazy about food, an incredible cook, maybe even in his words, a chef. Who knows, right? So what was it like? Take us like the dialogue, what the conversation looked like, what your strategy was then, and how you executed it.
Well, I mean, it's funny to look back. I mean, we were, I remember very well, we were sitting at Milady's, which sadly no longer exists in Soho, and having a couple beers in the afternoon. This wasn't the first time we came up with this, but this is sort of our first sit-down meeting, I guess, if you want to call that.
Did he pitch you in this moment, or did he already?
No,
bring it up?
we had already, he had already pitched me on the idea, and I already had expressed interest.
Okay.
And so we, very quickly just sort of started running with it, and sat down at Milady's and started kind of hashing out the idea. And one of the things that happened at that meeting, which is kind of fun, is this, when we talked about, the obvious question of, what should this be? Because he was starting a food truck. He's a guy that was mostly interested in the entrepreneur, the growing of the business.
That was going to be my question. How did you guys get into your lanes?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question and a complicated one that evolved over time. But he was really interested in starting a business and the nuts and bolts of starting it and growing it. And mine was certainly, kind of the food and marketing and branding.
Yeah, creative.
Yeah, totally. So we sat down and started talking about what the, so what is the concept? Because he had, he knew he wanted to start a food truck. I was game. And we immediately I was like, well, we should do Mexican barbecue for sure.
Why did you immediately know that was your solution?
There was a couple reasons. One is it was food that I was kind of cooking, that I had loved cooking, but not thinking about it. It wasn't like I had, intentionally at home been working on this combination
of. You need to feed yourself.
No, total, 100%. And it was I was drawn towards the sort of slow and low, comfort foods of the South, and then marrying those with all kinds of flavors from around the world that added like spice and flavor and freshness, texture into the slow and low barbecue.
Well, you started a business before this, did you not? Or like a media, like chili, some kind of chili, like
Yeah.
Is that still going?
Well, we actually just last year kind of absorbed it into Mexicue, the chili lab.
Yeah.
So that was like, just spices. Exactly. So spices from around the world,
Yep.
primarily chilies, and sort of a deep dive into like, the variety and nuance of flavor profiles of chilies from around the world.
Okay.
Super geeky culinary stuff.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
So what I do love about this is you're able to tie your passion with your business. And I think that that's super important because you need to be obsessed. You need to want to spend all of your time
100%
on this subject, whatever it is, because you're going to have to be successful.
100%.
So you were smart. I don't know if that was intuitive or intentional to align your passion with your business, or what was going through your mind?
I mean, that was just organic.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't super strategic or intentional. It was just like, and I think, it was a great, it's a typical, story of a, startup company where we were, both super passionate about it. It was just raw passion and excitement, and Dave was excited about, as excited about just the entrepreneurial grit of getting this thing off the ground.
I love it. So bringing it back to the conversation, can you reflect back at that time you guys got together? You're sitting at this bar, you're having a conversation. What was the conversation? I know it was a long time ago, but what kind of things were you guys, exploring, and maybe even what should you have been exploring that you didn't explore?
Oh God, well that list is too long to go over probably right now. But it was essentially like a back of the envelope conversation. Yeah. Like it was typical, like, I mean, we might have even had like a napkin on the table where we were like, sketching stuff out.
Nice.
Like that was it. It was like, okay, like just that initial crafting, like, well, what do we want to do? And then a little bit of realism about like, okay, so what are our constraints from a financial standpoint? And
so what were your constraints? Because I feel like people who are listening to this who might have the same constraints, like maybe you can inject some creativity in how to overcome those challenges.
Totally. So at the time, we were definitely interested in ignore the blender in the background. By the way,
like, don't be worried about the blender in the background because I love the fact that we're
actually in a restaurant, people.
I'm in a restaurant.
Real things happening.
I'm driving around the nation, like we're sitting in a restaurant right now. You're gonna go to the kitchen. I love it. Keep going.
So let's see. I lost my train of thought with that blender, but
no, you're fine. So you're talking about like the strategy of where you guys
the constraints.
Your constraints. That's
yeah,
right.
I mean, so what I was gonna say is, so while the food truck was definitely like the impetus for the idea of starting a business, we were from the get go interested in growing a brand, and we weren't sure exactly like where that would head. But something, for me, it was about growing a food brand of some sort, and a likely channel would be, or a likely path would be brick and mortar restaurants. One of the advantages of the food truck is it cost us about, $75,000 in friends and family, credit card debt, a little bit of money walking away from our corporate jobs, like cobbling that together, and we were off to the races.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question, and it's a weird thing to talk about, but money.
Yeah.
Like, and I know you guys came from the corporate world. Were you smart enough to put money away? Were you saving up for this, or?
Dave probably was. Dave was smart enough.
I lived in New York City.
Exactly. I was.
Money, right?
20s in New York City. Every dime was going towards.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Food and booze. No, we had. I mean, a little bit. But it was, but not a lot. I mean, neither one of us had not a lot of savings from work. And
so what was the number you guys came up with that you thought you would need to make it?
I wish I knew.
Ballpark.
Well, if I had to guess, ballpark, we probably said 40 to 50.
And this is, and you knew you were going to go for a food truck.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. So I'm sure on that napkin, it was like, listing out these things, and it was probably added up to about 40 to 50. Okay. Wishful thinking, like big time wishful thinking.
What did it take, if you can reflect back to that time?
I mean, I think to get the thing like on the streets, it was about 75.
Okay.
But then we, of course, did what most businesses do and started losing money immediately.
Okay. What were you losing money on that you didn't necessarily have to lose money on?
Everything. I mean, we just didn't, I mean, I had worked in restaurants, but focusing on food in a sort of like a very specific capacity. I didn't have any exposure to restaurant operations. And so, we were just learning on the job.
So reflecting back, knowing what you know now about restaurant operations, reflecting back at that time, what advice would you give yourself?
I mean, one of the things I tell people when I have this kind of conversation with someone who's interested in starting a food truck or a restaurant for that matter that doesn't come from that background is, there's a lot to be gained by just going and working in operations in a restaurant.
Yeah. So you didn't do that because you were working.
Not really, no. I mean, I spent 5 years working on the line.
Yeah, and I don't think enough people do that. When we say stage, the first thing that comes to mind is, like cooking for free, getting on the line for free.
Yeah,
but we never go to stage with a GM.
No, great point.
Why not?
It's a terrific point.
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. Like that would be so valuable.
Right?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, because and we could talk about this as well, but I have such a firm believer that what sets apart, on the short list of things that set apart successful restaurants is operations, just the nuts and the bolts every day of getting that right, which, I still don't, it's still not my area of expertise, which is, why my partner sitting over there, Lynn, is just really critical in the success of the organization.
And I'm really interested in how you brought Lynn on and when you brought Lynn
on.
Sure. Because, so we've unpackaged a lot. I think what you did is the best thing you can do. Just throw yourself into it. You're never going to have all the answers. Right. You just need to start, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you just need to, otherwise you just don't get it off the ground at all.
You also don't need to go for the brick and mortar out of the gates.
Right.
With a little bit of a preface there, food trucks aren't necessarily easier.
Which you
learned. So get into that. What do we need to know about starting a food truck that people don't consider?
I mean, I guess building on the point that we lost money right off the bat, some of that was because of a lack of experience.
What were you losing money on? I don't know if we really got that.
Well, so let's talk about, the challenges of the food truck.
Yeah.
And there's the conception out there that it would be like, oh, it's just worlds easier to operate and financially a lot easier. It's just not at all. If you're...
The bar is lower, for sure, but... the logistics, the driving, you got to pay for a commissary now.
Exactly.
Maybe in 2010, the regulations were a little looser, but
for the first year they were looser, and then that quickly changed. But right out of the gates, it was we were buying. One of the things we were buying, one of the things that I wanted to do with this brand when we started it, I was shopping at the farmers market in Grand Army Plaza, where near where I lived in Brooklyn. And had developed a relationship, just personal relationship with these farmers, and loved cooking from fresh produce and whatever else at the farmers market, and figured, oh, that's going to be great for the brand, and let's definitely do that. I mean, that was just, we still do that here at Mexicue, but sparingly. It's very difficult financially to be buying all of your, at least for the model where Mexicue exists, to be buying all of your produce from farmers at the farmers market. So that was, an example of one of the things we learned. Labor was also just expensive. It's a hard job, and we cared about paying people well, and we cared about the people that were working, with us on the truck and in the commissary.
So is it safe to say that you underestimated what the cost of doing food well and taking care of people well would be?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was also a model that was evolved. It was sort of a new model. I mean, not it was that innovative, but it was at least in New York, it was a new model in an old model in a new market.
Yeah.
And
I'm hesitant to spend a lot of time in the early days because I don't necessarily encourage people. I think the food truck market in 2010 isn't what it is in 2020.
No.
So
no.
Yeah.
I mean, a year later, it would have drastically changed.
Exactly. It's a lot more noisy of a space.
Totally.
The regulations have really tightened up, and there's a lot of other really cool things you can do to test a brand that have a lot less overhead involved. So I'm curious, knowing what you know now about the restaurant market, the industry we're in, if you were going back to that version of yourself in 2009, what would the conversation look like today?
I mean, what was invaluable about the way that we started with the food truck, and some of the other things we did early on, is we started building brand awareness.
Yes.
We were sort of building a brand, and it's hard to assign a specific value to that. It's sort of intangible.
You're just putting yourself out there.
Totally.
You're putting food in mouths. You're
exactly.
putting your colors, your lettering, your text, all that.
100%.
Were you pivoting? Did you evolve the brand at all?
Oh yeah, very, very much.
Take us
Right
through
away,
that process.
right away. So the quick pivot was into catering, and so we did catering like with the truck.
Okay.
But then we had a commissary from early on because we couldn't cook all the food. We were cooking everything from scratch.
Yep.
Everything that we were doing, we couldn't do all that on the truck. So early on, we had a commissary, which, as you pointed to, that's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so from early on, we kind of had this like kind of corporate commissary hub, and we needed more spokes on that hub.
Okay.
And so early we pivoted.
Channels to sell, are you saying?
Exactly,
Okay.
channels to sell. So early we pivoted to catering, just traditional catering, which again we did with the truck, but we also did we were doing all kinds of we were doing like weddings and all kinds of stuff.
What other
with and
events
without the truck?
were good for you that you would recommend somebody who's just getting started if they want to get into catering? You said weddings. What else?
Weddings were good. I mean, they were tough. It's like there's so many moving parts and such a high bar for execution.
Yeah.
But what we did a lot of corporate catering.
Okay.
Which is less, sexy, but we did a lot
Also,
of.
not a lot of opportunity there right now.
Not right now. Not right now.
Yeah.
But hopefully,
Soon. Yeah.
But that was, we made a big effort, and that was one thing that both Dave and I did early on was driving that sales process.
Yeah. So take us into the conversation about branding, because I think this is probably where you really shine, because you have a background in marketing, you have a background in art. I feel like branding is very intuitive to you, and you've pointed out in previous interviews you've done that branding was a big part of your success. So what does a strong brand need?
Well, I guess in addition to having kind of a clear point of view and, clear brand attributes that are appealing to people, it's, there's sort of an emotional resonance that you want to try and develop.
How do
with
you
your
do
guest? I don't. You're already gonna. This question is above my head, but
is it intuitive for you?
No, I don't know. I think some of that comes through. I mean, we're fortunate in the restaurant industry to have the opportunity to have a lot of personal touch points or whatever. And so I think, I think that's really valuable in deepening the emotional brand connection to people is just those, the expression of the brand through customer service.
Okay. So living your brand, not just saying
Totally.
you're something, but putting on paper, who are we? And then how do we, starting with the end in mind, who do we want to be? And
Yep.
how do we show up every day to be that?
Totally.
So what do you do to do that?
Well, so for us, I guess one example of that is, from very early on and with the truck, I mean, it was less surprising as a truck, but it still stands to this day. We sort of one of the things that was important to our brand was just people expressing their individuality, right? And we felt that Mexicue kind of represented that and creatively expressing your individuality. And so, we've had some fun gear in the past, but we've never had anyone in uniforms. And still to this day, it's a conversation we've had because sometimes it causes confusion in the restaurants now with people trying to find their server.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, I think that's one example is just having people that, the team just, able to be themselves in that way.
Yeah. I think there was a really a point where that's the thing, you hear from all over the place, a good brand is a solid uniform. A good brand is all these things. When you communicate with your clean in I don't know. There's just so much different advice all over the place. And I think it all depends on what you're going for. What's the end game, which is why you need to start with the end in mind. Who are we? What do we want to be? And reverse engineer that.
Right.
But yeah. So back to branding. What were you doing unique with your brand? How were you communicating your brand to the public?
Well, at the time when we started the business, it was actually if you can believe it, not early days in social media, but it was sort of a new phenomenon. I mean, it certainly wasn't early days in social media, but I mean, compared to we didn't have, this was 2010. So 10 years ago, only 10 years ago yet, Instagram was, if it even existed, it was not a thing. And
yeah.
Twitter was kind of, was a bigger social media platform at the time. And so we definitely jumped onto that, and we were using that as looking to model, Koji and some of the other really cool trucks out of LA that were leaders not only in the food world but also doing some of those innovative things in social. And so we just sort of latched onto that very early on as a fun way to talk about who we are, A, and B, engage with the guest, the customer.
So, I mean, I think what's important is what you're communicating, not necessarily the tools you're using to communicate, because that's changed for today. But get more into what you're communicating. Like, give me an example of what your Twitter feed would have looked like, say, 24 hours leading into an event.
Totally. I think what we were probably, one of the things that's like core to the brand is just that we're taking like kind of creatively taking things and combining them in unexpected, fun, creative ways. I mean, that's sort of like, kind of the origin of the culinary. And, that we're not, that we're not a traditional, authentic Mexican restaurant, which is probably where people like put us without knowing much more about the brand.
Yeah.
So we worked hard to like make sure we were expressing that. And so, a lot of it was about expressing, kind of trying to convey, that quality of the food in the brand. And then we did a lot of like, we talked about music, we did fashion events, we did music events, we talked about music. We, we, as I said, we were always trying to do like kind of fun, cool gear and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think that was the type of content that we were focusing on early on.
So what I'm hearing from you early on, you're sharing your vision.
Yep.
And I think that's not what people do well enough. They make a brand and say, this is what we're going to do, but they don't really communicate what the vision is. Because you weren't your traditional Mexican restaurant.
Right.
Right. You, in a way where you kind of invented your own kind of cuisine. You combined, you did like a hybrid or fusion of barbecue and Southern barbecue and Mexican food.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when communicating, if you're trying to do something new or when you're sharing your vision, is there any specific advice on what translates well when sharing vision?
I mean, this is going to sound cheesy or generic or whatever, but I think just, authenticity is such an overused word, but I think it's just, just being authentic.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the next thing I was going to point out is that you weren't just talking about the food. You're talking about what you also like, what the brand likes, like the music, the events, and other stuff like that. Totally.
And I think one of the things that
that's authenticity.
Exactly.
I'm not just a restaurant. We're not just a restaurant.
Exactly.
We also like all this other stuff.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Is authentically us.
Yes. And one of the things that just reminded me of that I just failed to mention earlier is like, one of the things we still work on today and early on was really important as well. I think it's important for all brands is just making sure that the people that guests and consumers or whatever understand the people behind the brand. And so that was like, especially as we're living in a digital world, it's becoming increasingly important to, make sure people understand there are people behind the brand.
Yeah.
And that adds authenticity, I think, which is critical and
so would you spotlight employees or chefs?
Yeah, I mean, we did. We spotlighted employees. We definitely spotlit lit up
put
those
a light
employees.
On. Yeah.
Yep. Put a light on those employees, and that was easier to do in some cases than others. It's something we still talk about today. It's like, well, how do we like this? Carmelo, who's on the line right now at Nomad, where we are, is like such a rock star. He's so awesome. Like, how do we put a spotlight on Melo more often?
I literally just had an idea. And I know this is your story, but just like people doing Instagram takeovers, right? Like, why not let one of your employees do a takeover of your Instagram account?
Yep, it's a great idea. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but it's just all these things require resources to actually execute it and get it done the right way. Yeah. But that was like from early on, it was like, cause we got plenty of the spotlight, Dave, myself, and, but the challenge was, kind of spotlighting the rest of the team.
So what, in my research, I know, and this is, I think, really rare.
Yeah.
You went from a food truck to a brick and mortar in like 3 or 4 months.
Well, yes, that's correct. And about a year later we opened.
Okay. So what was that transition like, going from food truck to brick and mortar? Did you retain the food truck? Were you using it more like a catering arm?
We did. Oh yeah. So at the time, we talked a little bit about pivoting before, but we continued to evolve and pivot in these early years, and then we kind of retracted at some point, which we can talk about. But so 2010 started with the food truck. 2011. Summer of 2011, late summer, August of 2011, opened up our first grab-and-go restaurant. Okay. We're now full service with a bar. First one was grab-and-go. We had a second truck. We had a catering business, which we talked about, and we were doing like pop up, all the Madison Square Eats and Smorgasbords, like all those type of pop up markets around the city. We were doing those as well.
Okay. How hard is it to pivot? Because I know you were originally trying to go for a fast casual thing, and I'm surprised honestly that during this time, 2010 to 2015, you would pivot away from fast casual because everybody else and their mother seemed to be pivoting towards fast casual.
Yeah.
So why did you make that choice to get away from it?
Well, there's a couple reasons for that. So we were, after we opened up the first brick and mortar restaurant in 2011, around 2012, we started realizing that we needed to bring in some like outside capital and hopefully some, a strategic partner who could help us, because neither of us had come from the restaurant industry, someone who had a little bit more experience than we did.
Okay.
Can help us advise on, kind of evolving the brand and the business.
So at what point did you realize you guys really had something and that you could scale this thing?
Well, we realized we had done a good job on branding, and I'm not doing a good job of articulating why, but like we realized that we had done a good job just, on developing a brand early on. But what we also realized that, we had great top line sales, but we were also hadn't figured out like the right model.
Okay. What do you mean by model? You mean like fast
financial
casual, full service? Or
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In a financial model that was actually like dropping money to the bottom line.
Okay. So get specific on the options of financial models you were looking at and the one that you adopted.
Well, what we were doing just wasn't working great.
Okay.
So the food truck definitely wasn't.
So paint that
great
picture of
for the
what
brand.
you were doing up to that point and what you knew had to change. Like what were you doing and what were the changes you made as far as financial model?
So I guess I'll frame it in a slightly different way. So what we knew at the time was that we were doing some things really well: food, branding. We had good top line sales. People were coming into the restaurant.
Yeah.
Restaurants were busy. Food trucks were busy. All that good stuff. But we just hadn't quite figured out
The margins weren't there.
The margins weren't
Your
there.
prime costs were off.
Yeah, the margins weren't there. For the individual, some of them maybe more than others. Maybe one pop-up was successful, others weren't. But then we also had this big corporate structure, and so the whole model wasn't in place. And we knew we had an appetite to keep growing the brand, and we just understood at that point that it was important that we try and bring in some outside capital.
Yeah.
Again, someone ideally strategic who could help add value to the company, and B, we were also just doing too much.
Okay.
And we were cognizant of that at the time. It was like, and some of that was just early survival mode and pivoting, as you said.
You're taking a shotgun approach. You were just like
$100%,
shotgun blasting, seeing
100%.
what hits.
Yep,
and then,
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And seeing what hits and just sort of like, any additional thing we can do to try and like bring in more money, which was kind of, sort of survival mode and we need to do. But ultimately that just creates too much complexity.
But I also don't think that's a bad thing early on.
No,
Because
agreed.
you have to try things. You don't know.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have to take risks and try things and, fail
eventually
at
you
some.
got to start to, create formulas around
Yeah.
what does work and what doesn't work so you can recreate it.
Exactly. And one of the things that we did realize once we opened up the brick and mortar was that, there was a more reliable model there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a good model there. And so it was a very, very small space, 400 square feet, and
Okay.
like smaller than we probably would have wanted, but like
Yeah.
affordable for our
But at
first
the
brick and
same
mortar
time,
restaurant.
that's important because people get in trouble. I think they go too big too soon.
Yeah, this was the opposite.
And like you haven't developed the demand yet. The brand hasn't really gotten legs and gotten out. So you go too big too soon, and then you have all this overhead, all these liabilities, all these employees, right? And like you don't let cash flow and
Totally.
other things determine your growth.
Yeah, exactly. And so we almost had the opposite problem here. It was a very small space, 450 square feet, and like lines out the door because we already had good brand awareness.
Yeah.
And thank God, when we opened up our first brick and mortar, people were still interested in experiencing Mexicue in that way and not just as a food truck.
Yeah. But I would take a line out the door and butts in every seat over never a line.
Oh, 100%.
And empty chairs.
Oh, definitely. And controlling every cost perfectly.
It communicates something
Yeah.
that this is a good spot.
Yeah,
and,
agreed.
And like,
Yeah.
and eventually you're gonna go there, but a year of people just being like, oh, it's always so busy. Like,
Yeah.
at least you have somebody in the queue constantly, and then
Yep.
you can go to the next space, and people are like, finally, like,
Yes.
So I think that is a really good approach. But I get where you're coming from too, where you're just seeing people walk by because they don't want to stand in line. So you're like money loss.
Yeah, we just said. We also realized from a brand standpoint, it was such a small space, and it was And it was, so we thought we could do more fun things with the brand, more cool things with the brand in a larger footprint.
So how long did it take you to go to from that grab and go small 400 square foot space to a larger space? Is this that larger space?
Nope. This is the one we opened. Nope. So the first one we opened, so we went through this fundraising process, and that was like a brutal, painful process of, just like pounding the pavement, selling.
What channels, what mediums did you use?
I mean, every single one. It was just like, all of us, we're just like tapping every single person in our network to make an introduction, like endless lunches and all that kind of stuff.
Now, what are your thoughts on taking money, on raising capital? Like, I get a little weird about that sometimes, and I'm not saying I have all the answers.
Yeah.
But what concerns me about that is when you start taking money from people, like how do you make sure that they don't start to determine what the brand is and that they don't start steering the ship? Find
the right partner. I mean, that's what's interesting, and this is kind of circling back to a question you asked a few minutes ago, which I was eager to tell you about. But it's like it's tough because generally when you're going through that fundraising process at an early stage as a company, you're like, you don't have the luxury of being able to like take all the time in the world and choose the perfect partner. Right?
Yeah.
So it's super tricky in that respect. I mean, yeah, it's very tricky in that respect.
I mean, I don't know if you're alluding to the fact that David is no longer in the business, or is that separate from what
no. And no. Dave moved on, amicably later on. But like, so at the time we went through this, so we went through this very long, grueling, painful fundraising process, but it ended really well.
Okay.
Because we brought on, the round was led by Sandy Bell, who we immediately.
Did I hear that right?
Sandy, yeah. Sandy. And so Sandy started Ruby Tuesday in college and then grew it as CEO for a long time and has been, started a bunch of other, Blackberry Farms, like all like really cool stuff, hospitality brands. And he led the round, and then we had a handful of other great investors. And we just, it was extremely fortunate because he was, he was kind of the ideal collaborator. I mean, he very much was interested in collaborating with us on growing the brand. And that's not always easy. I mean, it's not easy to collaborate with people in a creative or, business environment usually. It's just, but this is,
So that's something I'm really interested in.
Sure.
Because I don't think, and not everybody will agree with the statement, but I think to make it in this industry, you need some form of partner. Because I don't know if you can do it by yourself.
I agree.
Because there's just so many things you need to be good at. And unless you're a freak of nature, which most of us aren't, and there are those genius freaks of nature that just touch everything and they figure it out and they can do it.
Yeah.
But odds are, if you're listening to this, you're not that person. So you're going to need some kind of outside help. You're going to need some kind of partner who offsets you in some way.
Sure.
What was important to you when trying to find your partners? Finding the right partner is what you said. So how were you making sure you were finding the right partner?
Well, I think there were kind of a couple different ways we were looking at it, just sort of from like a, simple nuts and bolts of growing a business standpoint, and particularly a hospitality. I mean, we wanted someone who had, we were hoping to find a partner who had some more experience in growing a restaurant brand, right? And so that was important. And then the more, the trickier piece is finding something. It's so cliche, but it's truly a marriage.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's so not, I don't think it's cliche. I think it's super accurate. Like it's your life. It's a partner.
100%.
Ideally, like this is your life. This is your life's work.
I mean, there's no overstating that.
Yeah.
And so whether it's cliche or not, it's so true.
Yeah.
And so, there's some sort of sussing out of like whether it's the right long-term partner.
Yeah. So when Sandy did come on board, what things started to change in your business that were just absolutely like, holy crap. Like,
well,
what would we have done without you?
At that point, to kind of, again, circle back to, one of your questions, is that at that point, we sort of took a step back and we're like, okay, well, so here's the brand today. Here's what we've been doing. Like, what do we want to do tomorrow? We've got now.
And where was the brand at that point? Like,
well,
paint the picture of what the brand was.
So the pictures of that was 2012, 2013. We had, our tiny little grab and go restaurant, eager to grow outside of that space. We had 2 trucks on the streets. We were doing pop-ups, all the things we talked about. And so, good brand visibility in New York, all those things. What we thought at the time was this would be logical to step into a fast casual style restaurant, bigger, walk down the line, all those things. We weren't 100% sure about that. When Sandy came on board and we started talking about, well, what if we actually did a more of a hybrid at the time, I think was the conversation, but not a line setup, and incorporated, a quick casual full service experience with a bar. So for me, I lit up when we started having this conversation, because from a brand standpoint and a product, a menu standpoint, I was like, well,
So so a quick casual with a bar, meaning it's a counter service.
Full service restaurant that is quick and casual.
Okay.
Yeah.
So quick and casual with your back of house operations, where you're probably cooking a lot at once and plating quickly, or what's
yeah. I mean, we kept the food truck line is like what you'll see in the kitchen right now. So we've got a few more pieces of equipment, but we have tried to exercise some restraint in not expanding. We've expanded the menu quite a bit and evolved that quite a bit, but not the kitchen operations too much.
So moving to this quick casual, full bar, full service approach, how did that start to change things?
Well, it changed. It was a new operations model, and Sandy was, in all of his business has been very hands-on in operations and operations focused, and so we spent a lot of time on getting that just the nuts and bolts of a new systems processes model down, and obviously layering on a service component, which we hadn't experienced before in that way. And we evolved, as I mentioned, it allowed me to evolve the menu quite a bit as well. And we layered on a bar element, which allowed us to do some really cool stuff with tequila, mezcal, and bourbon. Also
increases your profits.
From a financial standpoint, it changed things quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't realize that until we were a year or two in, but it was pretty quickly, we pretty quickly realized that from a P&L standpoint, this was a good decision.
Yeah. So seeing Sandy come in with his restaurateur experience and his successful background, what kind of changes, what did you learn from observing him working on your business about how to implement system and process?
That's a big question. And he was, a more of a high level advisor on that stuff, although he knows all the stuff backwards and forwards. But what we did is we brought someone on that was like a very high level operations person from Ruby Tuesday. And so knew those systems inside and out. We brought that person on to manage the general managers.
Got you.
And so, having the right people and real good quality managers who had experience in, multi-unit restaurants with really good systems and processes in place was the kind of focal point of, that was a huge step for us, was just getting the right people in the right places.
Okay. And is this still 2012, 2013? Is it where we're at?
Yeah.
And this is one location at this point, right?
Yep. So the first full service location was on 40th between Broadway and 6th, is on 40th between Broadway and 6th.
Okay.
1,200 square feet. The one we're now in Nomad is about 2,400 square feet. This was the second that came about a year later.
Okay. So this is kind of a unique approach. We talk a lot about partnerships, but usually it's one person and another person. Whereas I feel like Sandy kind of brought this is a partnership between two business entities, it sounds like. I don't know what you labeled yourself as, but was he bringing a team with him?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So was it between two people or two entities, like corporate or like LLC?
No. I mean, he came on as made an investment in the corporate holding company.
Got you.
And
but he wasn't just a silent investor, obviously.
No, not at all. No.
So what do we need to know about setting that up, that agreement, that partnership agreement, and this, I guess. I mean, I know we're going back 8 years. Did he bring on lawyers? What do we need to know about doing that right?
Well, let's see. I mean, it's a complicated question, I guess. I'm trying to think of what's good advice for people who would be thinking about this. And I think one of the things that comes to mind that happens a lot in these restaurant structures is people create. I mean, we have different LLCs for all the restaurants, but we have the same ownership structure that's held in a holding company. Okay. A lot of times you have different investors that come into each different individual LLC, and it gets very complex from a.
So you have 4 locations right now?
We have 5 locations right now, yeah.
So you have a different LLC for each restaurant location?
Yes, we have a different LLC, but that's just for for liability purposes, to sort of to limited liability purposes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But everything is 100% owned by the holding company.
So is it an LLC series? Is it one EIN number, or does each
Nope,
LLC?
each one has its own EIN number.
Gotcha.
They're all individual LLCs. There's an LLC that sits on top as a holding company, and the holding company owns everything. So it's really simple. You know,
Okay.
the holding, I mean, you know, sort of ignore the individual LLC stuff, and the holding company owns everything.
Gotcha. Cool. That's super helpful. So moving forward, when you started, like what happened in that 1 year from 2012 to 2013 that you said, okay, well, I think we're ready to try this someplace else? When did you know you were ready to give the brand legs?
Pretty quickly after we opened up the first full service restaurant on 40th. It
Okay.
was, you know, there was definitely something that clicked.
Okay.
And I think it was two things probably. One was we, you know, the brand had sort of seen the best we were seeing the best iteration of the brand. Mexicue living in this full service restaurant with a bourbon and tequila bar. It's fun, loud music. That just felt great.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, this from a concept standpoint, this feels awesome.
Okay. What about strategy and formula? Because is that what you're kind of referring to right now? Like that's what you were trying to figure out before when you were kind of.
Yeah, well, that's the second thing.
Okay.
Is I mean, like we were way more buttoned up, and the financial that was showing in the financials.
So can you get specific? And if you mentioned this,
Sure.
bring it back to the surface. What were the key things operationally that changed? Other than the service style, what
Yeah.
other, maybe the back house operations? What were the big things that you were changing in your business that started to really improve the margins and really become more profitable and more streamlined?
Implementing systems and processes.
Yeah. Were there any key systems or processes that really impacted your operation, your business? It's hard to reflect back on this.
Well,
stuff.
no, I mean it's all the obvious stuff. I mean, I think, you know, I can't remember when we did inventory off and on, you know, always, but like we really buttoned up the inventory game. We also
What does buttoning up the inventory game look like?
like doing we probably had a better inventory management system at that point that we were paying more attention to and just doing more detail oriented, you know, counts every week of inventory.
Okay.
And so we just were more dialed in.
Yeah.
Like,
And a little teaser, and I have to do a little shameless plugging right here. I'm in the process of collaborating with Rudy Mick, one of my trusted mentors within the Restaurant Stoppable network. And we're going to be launching a step-by-step process for, I think, daily inventory or like at least weekly inventory.
Yeah.
So if that's something that you guys want to do in your business and you're interested, shoot me an email, eric@restaurantstoppable.com, and I'll let you know when that's ready.
that's awesome, man.
We're going to be dropping it like any day, if not any week now.
I mean, that's so smart. It's something, I mean, still to this day with all the like great people
Yeah.
and, you know, systems and processes in the world, we still struggle with it.
And there's great tools now that
Yeah,
you
there
can
are.
use
Mhm.
to incorporate into your systems. Are you using any of those tools for inventory?
Not really. I mean, we use nothing on top of it. We use a Restaurant 365 for
Nice.
inventory, you know, for accounting, inventory management, and you know, sort of off and on for other things.
Yeah.
So
Past
yeah, we
sponsor
just
of the
use
show.
their.
We love them.
What's that?
Oh,
Great.
sponsor of the show. We
Yes,
love them.
awesome. Yeah. So do I. So we use them.
Okay, cool. Aside from inventory, what else did you guys
Labor management,
Okay.
and we didn't use any. At some point, we started using Restaurant 365 for scheduling, and then we went to hot schedules, and so we sort of had some better technology that helped us do that a little bit better.
And what are you using now for labor management?
Well, we are on pause with hot schedules.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you looking?
I'm
curious.
I don't know. Yeah, we're first of all, we're sitting in an empty restaurant
Well,
right now because we're in
good
New York
point.
City, and
Good
so
point.
we don't need.
I have to remind myself that.
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
pandemic.
But we still do have, we still do have people coming in. We just don't need we don't need to
Gotcha.
do too much sophisticated scheduling right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're
I
just
try
kind
to
of
forget
looking at
about
options.
pandemic as much as possible.
I know, exactly.
So great, and I love the detail. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
for
no,
getting
by all
into
means,
that.
yeah.
So at what point were you like, okay, let's take this out of New York City, because you have 5 locations now. It's 2 in New York. You have 1 in DC, and you have 1 in Stanford.
Yep, we have 3 in New York.
3 in New York. Okay.
And we have 1 in DC and 1 in Stanford.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, like how did you? What were some of the challenges that you had to face when you were trying to move this brand that you've established that has trust in this community? How do you take that culture, that brand, and put it someplace else?
So our next stop was Stamford, Connecticut, and the reason we went to Stamford is because I moved from New York City about 40 years ago up to northern Westchester, with kind of a growing family, and Lynn Wilson, who's my partner and our director of operations, lives further north in Connecticut is where
Okay.
she's based. So we were both up there. We're both in the restaurants all the time.
Gotcha.
Lynn's in the restaurants all the time. So that felt like an area that would be logical if we were starting to take a step outside of New York City, because we could be there just because of the proximity to where we lived.
Yeah. I love that. So something I wanted to talk about earlier, and I know that I'm asking you a question injected within another question.
All good.
So it's getting a little confusing. We did mention that you opened with David. And I'm curious because sometimes you start projects with people.
Sure.
And some people want to stay with that project for life. And other people are like, you know what? This isn't for me. This isn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for that situation where, you end up deciding, hey, like this isn't what I want to do anymore. If somebody decides they want to get out, how do you do that amicably, like you were able to do? Because I think that it doesn't always end nice. So what advice do you have for us if people do want out? And then how do you bring new people in? Because obviously you have to replace that partner.
Sure. I don't know about advice for. I mean, I think it's sort of basic stuff, like just being, honest and respectful with these conversations. They're just tough conversations. And I think just being like, kind of honest and respectful with the communication, just like you are with your significant other when you're having,
That's like a marriage, like
it's 100%.
Yeah.
So I think it's just that, and being, again, it's like sort of obvious but just being fair,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some sort of like negotiation that has to happen with these things, which sort of affect, financials and that, and that sort of thing. And so it's, I think it makes it a lot easier when both parties are really have the intention of being fair.
Yeah. So at what point did David decide that he had enough of the restaurant industry, or with this concept of this?
Well, let's see. It was, I think it was 2014, 15.
So it was after Sandy came on.
Yeah, it was after Sandy came on. And I mean, you'd have to ask him why. I mean, what I can tell, I think he's an entrepreneur at heart for sure. And he was sort of very excited about growing things very quickly and starting new things. And I think he had some, his sights set on some other cool ideas already. And, I think I also, as I mentioned when we started the conversation, his passion is that, is the entrepreneurship. Mine is food. Yeah. This restaurant is so freaking hard. It's such a grind that I think unless you're super, super in love and passionate about the food, it's hard to grind it out for such a long time.
Of course. Yeah. So I can't help but think, because earlier you said that, you started with what your passion was and you reverse engineered it. Mm-hmm. And I think this is kind of a testament to why that's so important, because you were able to stick with it because it was your passion. But at the same time, some people's passions are starting new projects.
Yeah,
and if
exactly.
That's who you
Such
are,
a good point.
And if that's who you are, that's fine.
Such a good point.
But you need to know that, because
Such a good
if
point.
that is who you are, then you need to find somebody who has a passion about the thing.
Definitely.
So you can work on the business and they can work in the business. Well, you work on the business yourself too, but you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
So you need to find that partner. If
Agreed.
your thing's starting something, and that sounds like that's what David's thing was, there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to know, you need to be self-aware about what you want and be able to find and surround yourself with partners that are going to be able to be the elements of the business that you're not.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah.
Well said.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. So when David exited, were you thinking to yourself, okay, well, there's this void because he was responsible. His name was next to these items on the to-do list or the organizational chart. He was responsible for these things. Is that kind of when did Lynn come into the picture?
We already had a director of operations,
okay.
who was in place before
Ruby
Lynn.
Tuesdays.
Another Ruby Tuesday person. Yeah.
Okay.
That's, whenever
Great
we can find someone from Ruby Tuesdays, it just makes my life like infinitely easier. It's like, and so we had a director of operations. And I guess to answer the question, we sort of, we didn't need to, and that wasn't because Dave wasn't, contributing or adding value. He certainly was. But we also weren't at a stage at that point. We were tiny little, we probably had too many corporate people to begin with. Mm-hmm. We were tiny. We still are tiny. And so, this was 5 years ago. And in fact, we haven't grown. Our corporate team hasn't grown at all since then. And so we just, so we filled the gaps, I guess, just by adjusting my role, adjusting my director of operations role a little bit, Sandy's role in some ways, that kind of thing.
Got you. anything we have not discussed up to this point, because I'm looking at time goes by so fast in these interviews. We're an hour and 6 minutes into.
Well, don't sweat the timing.
Yeah, but I'm just curious. Anything that you were hoping we would discuss, anything that you know about yourself and your business, Mexicue, that is unique in some way that can really add value to somebody else who's listening to this. If like, where do you really shine? Do you think?
I mean, I don't think there's any gaps in what. I mean, I would just keep prying. We have covered a lot. Yeah, absolutely.
What was the question? Keep what?
Keep prying, I said. Pry away.
Yeah.
Keep going, yeah.
So I guess one of the things I do like to discuss, I used to really pull back the layers on how are you evolving, how are you adapting to get through COVID-19, and I kind of feel like at this point, if you haven't evolved, if you haven't adapted, the ship's kind of sailed. But what I am curious about is what do you see the future of the industry being, and how do you plan on evolving to stay relevant in what that future landscape looks like?
Another great and complicated question. I think the things that we're thinking about right now are, obviously having a digital presence has become increasingly important. And so we have invested a lot in that over the last year.
How have you evolved digitally? What are the key things? And I was sitting here, I'm not going to lie, I was totally eavesdropping on you guys talking about business. I was like, oh, they're talking about Instagram Reels.
Yeah.
They're talking about all this stuff. And I think a big reason why you were referred to me is that you really started to have a more of a presence, your personal face. You're like you talking directly to your guests and putting your face out there is a big part of one of the changes that happened over the years. So take us through that journey personally and what that was like.
Oh, it was painful.
I bet.
As an old man, as a dad, it's like not my comfort zone at all.
So how did you get out of your head and just start putting your face in front of a camera regularly?
Well, we were working with a couple agencies last year on rebranding. Mm-hmm. Two of them. One was helping us with like a brand identity evolution, and the other is like specialist in digital communication.
Okay.
Both awesome. And
was this who I just had the elbow bump with?
What's that? No.
Okay.
No.
The elbow bump is my way of saying shook hands with some of the people that you're.
Yeah, no. Oh, Lindsay. No. Lindsay's actually like on our team. These are two agencies.
Gotcha.
Lindsay's on our team, executes marketing for us on a day-to-day basis. Awesome.
So yeah, take us through those evolutions and how these companies influence your change.
Yeah, so both of them basically in like this this process of like trying to understand the brand, they're like, you guys need to do a better job of talking about, who's behind the brand, and that starts with the person who like started the company.
Yeah.
And is still like, very involved in the food and, culture and everything else. And so, that was sort of like one of the themes we identified and just sort of like realized, okay, like that's super important and it may be uncomfortable but we've got to do that. And the way to do that right now is social media.
Yeah. And this is honestly something that I think I struggle with personally. What I'm curious, like, I just never think in my head, like, oh, share what your emotions are right now. Like, talk to your listeners, like get vulnerable, get real.
Totally.
I think I'm good at doing that during the podcast and being honest.
Yeah.
I'm not constantly, I don't have so much of an ego that I feel like people want to hear about the inner dialogue of Eric Cacciatore.
Oh, I mean, every time I do it, I'm like, why? No one wants to hear this. Why am I doing this kind of thing? So I think we're just, I think we're, probably not from the generation that's wired that way.
Well, that's what I think that's what my internal dialogue is like. Who gives an F?
100%.
And like the world is so noisy. Do I really want to contribute to the noise?
100%.
So how do you? So this.
You're
resonating with what I'm sharing. How do you overcome that? And what's your advice for me for overcoming that?
I just had to allocate time every day and just force myself to start doing it.
So you block time.
Yeah, just literally, block time.
Yeah,
and just and acknowledge it as something that's an important part of the workday that needs, because I think one of the things that people do is it's like, because you undervalue it so much. And because you've got this conversation in your head that like, why does anyone want to hear this? And, if that's the conversation going on in your head, that's not, you're not recognizing that as valuable work. Yeah. So as a result, it's not on the list of your things that you need to take care of. It's anywhere near the top, and you're just trying to sort of squeeze it in. And that's, particularly for someone like, for guys like us, like you need to actually like allocate time to make it happen.
So when you're looking at your calendar, you're like, oh, it's almost, Instagram talk time. what does the dialogue, like how are you planning that conversation that you're having with your audience?
Well, we think about, I work with Lindsay on sort of mapping out it's kind of like an editorial calendar just based on what we have going on at the restaurants.
Okay.
And so over the last, several months, that's been like, it's changing. The business is changing constantly. So there's been a lot to talk about there, but it could be anything from that to, menu updates to, exactly showing the work or, trying to like, incorporate people on the team, that kind of thing. So it's really following that like editorial calendar and figuring out what we want to, what are the talking points based on all those things.
So you're looking at your calendar, like what are we doing in the business today? Like what are the changes we're making? And you're just sharing behind the scenes.
Yeah,
and you're just
exactly.
getting real. Do you ever get emotional? Do you ever bring is it just like what's happening in the business, or is there ever what's happening in Thomas Kelly's head?
Well, there's definitely some emotion that seeps into it occasionally, despite my best efforts to.
But is that a bad thing?
No. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I should be doing it more. I mean, I think I'm probably too, rigid about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's not, it's again, it's like, this isn't like an intuitive, natural, comfortable thing. So I think if it were, it'd be easy to share emotion a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, especially over the last year, it's been such an emotional year and such emotion tied to the business that there's been a lot of opportunities for better or worse to share that.
So when you're posting these, I'm on Instagram right now. If you're wondering why I'm typing away while I'm talking
please.
to you, you're posting these to your feed, or is this your? So I'm on the Mexicue right now. It's mostly just food.
Yeah.
But you also have your private. Okay, so
you're dialing into like an ongoing question we have about like how what does the ecosystem look like?
What you've done is so you have the Mexicue brand, which is the focus is the food, right?
Yep.
But then in your bio, there's your handle right there,
Yep.
Thomas Kelly 3. So the thing is, you using the bio to say, hey, like, so here's the brand, but if you're interested in who's behind the brand,
correct,
here's Thomas Kelly.
Yep.
And then from there, it's just your face, and it's just the life of Thomas Kelly. What you got going on? You with the wood background, staring at a camera.
Yeah.
Just what are you talking about when you're getting into this? Like, what are we going to work on? Well, I think we're already kind of.
Well, so I mean, no, I mean, it's like the editorial calendar. I think the balance of things is like a little bit, a little bit of updates on the business, and we've, there's been a lot to talk about over the last year. For me, it's important, that I think it's important that we we use that as a channel to talk about the creative process. With the food, and
see
cocktails.
Pictures of your kids, pictures of your dog.
Yeah. So it's a personal channel that exists primarily for.
But people want to see the people behind the brand.
Definitely.
And honestly, I think I could be way better at this myself. But I'm taking notes from you. I think this is really great.
Well, we'll see, Eric. It's interesting because I think we spent a lot of time over the last year and change, investing in creating content, and I, I'm happy with where we are, and we're making progress and getting better at it. But it's hard to assign a value to this stuff. I mean, it's hard to measure. I mean, we do try and measure the efforts, some social media efforts that tie to actual like conversions into sales. But then there's this sort of more amorphous, value of creating a brand.
It's also hard to track ROI on that stuff.
Exactly.
It's kind of just like one of those things. It's soulful. You just have to kind of believe that, like,
exactly,
it's going to come back some way.
Like so much branding is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it reminds me of where we started the conversation with the truck. It's like it's hard to like assign a value to some of that stuff.
Yeah, and we recently had Bruce Irving on the show from Smart Pizza Marketing in business. Local business marketing podcast, I think is his newer one. And we're talking, and I heard you guys mentioning it over here when I was setting up.
Yeah.
The focus on Reels.
Yep. So
why is that a focus for you guys right now? And Bruce brought this up earlier in that episode, but I want you to answer the question.
Oh, cool. Well, I'd love to hear your insights. But the answer is so two things. One of the things we've learned about Instagram and trying to understand this like ever evolving algorithm is that they like when you're doing the new stuff. And they like when everything.
They're going to reward people for spotlighting the new features.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the algorithms will push your content if you're using their new features.
Yep.
So if you want to get out in front of more people, use the new tools.
Exactly.
So what are the best practices with using Reels? What kind of content are you
Well, so the other thing that we the reason we were actually drawn towards it is because we were seeing a lot of like really cool food content that was a little bit more highly produced, a little bit slicker than just like a longer form video that you might chop up on stories or Instagram Live or a static post or whatever in your feed. And we were just really drawn from a creative standpoint to like, these quick little clips where you could demonstrate something that's going on in the kitchen, either in the restaurant or in my case at home, do a little cocktail demo, whatever else. And so we just, we were drawn to the like creative format.
Got you. I think that pretty much sums up what I've understand from why Reels are important right now. And kind of to take a few steps back, the reason, again, why we're talking about this, again, what are you doing to evolve in the new landscape?
Yep.
And if you were a brand that relied heavily on indoor or in-house experience, like you have heavily relied on, being a full-service, casual, fun environment, beautiful aesthetic, you lost that connection with your guests during COVID-19. What you did best, you could no longer do. So a lot of brands like yourself had to redirect that energy into a more digital presence. And this
100%.
This is the technique you're using to summarize up to this point.
Exactly.
I love it. There is one tool that came to mind, and I'm on Clubhouse now. Have you guys been exploring Clubhouse at all?
No.
Do you know what Clubhouse is?
No, tell me about Clubhouse now.
Okay, so it's supposedly like the latest new cool thing, and it's kind of like podcasting, and it's audio only, and you can't record it.
Yep.
I mean, there's workarounds with using like software on your phone to record it.
Yeah.
But once the Clubhouse, like once the room is done, like that audio is gone. But you invite people within your network to join a conversation. But it's like just taking off right now.
Cool.
And I was listening today a marketing this morning before coming over here. With the Reels, there's a cool tool, and it's escaping me, and it's on my phone right now, which is being used to record, so I can't look it up. But it's like Insta something, and I'll share it in the closing thoughts. And Jared, if you're listening to this, editing it, remind me to share it in the closing thoughts. I want to make sure. So stick around to the closing thoughts to hear about that. But yeah,
it's cool, nice. And so yet another social network I have to go out there and research and understand, and then figure out how to plug content into.
And I think this is kind of like another. You're bringing up a good point. And I feel like there's almost like a sickness, like a virus that's not COVID-19 that's injecting society right now. And it's just like all this focus on doing all these. We have to do all these things. We have to do these things. Yeah. What are we like? What's the result? What are we blind to right now? Is one of the things I'm kind of curious about. Where everybody's being told, you got to post as much as possible, but they forget to mention that you have to sit down and tag 30 people in those posts.
I know.
And are you doing all this tagging yourself?
Dude, that's another great example of. You just gave me anxiety. That just a spike of anxiety that's shot through my spine because I realized like should have been doing like it's on the list of things like a best practice to like and I keep forgetting to do it. It's like there's so much to keep track of. It's maddening.
And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. In like, do we have some type of social responsibility to like kind of push back on what's expected from us to do social media right? Because is social media, this tool that's supposed to bring us closer together, really just pushing us further apart because we're always in our phone, tagging, sharing, doing this stuff, trying to project this brand?
I don't know. That's a big question. I don't know if I'm like qualified to answer it, but what I can tell you is that, we've obviously, we were planning on trying to get better at this before COVID. Because of COVID, as you mentioned, we were all relying on digital channels a little bit more. And there are probably pros and cons to that. And, but what I do think is that, in our industry, like our industry is going to bounce back. Yeah. We're going to be opening up restaurants in some capacity. We already are, and hopefully greater capacity sooner rather than later. And, people are going to have a fundamental need and, desire to come, be around other people in a restaurant and put their phones down.
Yeah. So going forward, is there any operational changes? We can get off that topic. Are there any operational changes that you've pivoted within your organization to better receive the new normal?
A lot of, sort of safety, safety procedures and processes, systems, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, I mean, you're sitting in the restaurant right now, so you'll see, plexiglass dividers. You could see the tables are spread out further than they were a year ago. Everyone, I mean, everyone, of course, has masks on. There's there's just a long list of, is that the question? Like a long list of sort of procedures specific.
I think that stuff, my fingers are crossed that there's not going to be plastic dividers in restaurants beyond 2022. Yeah. Hopefully, God, please. Right. But as far as, so
beyond that.
Yeah. So you had to make changes in your business, better I don't know what your takeout game was before COVID-19. I don't know what your delivery game was before COVID-19. But there's a lot of people that are saying that they were creating new habits within people.
Yeah.
And they're going to be more likely in a year from now to there's not going to be as much resistance to use these other channels because it was their only option for the past 2 years.
So I think that for us, for a fast casual restaurant, I think a greater share of their sales pie will probably be made up of off-premise.
Yeah.
I hope that for us, we've invested a lot in growing the off-premise business over the last several months as well. My hope is that that's increases the size of the pie.
Yes.
And that one of the things that's part of what's key to our brand and what people like about Mexicue is that you come in with friends and family, eat and drink. The music is loud. People are waiters are being themselves, wearing there's an experience here that is not the same as the one that you have when you get tacos to go.
Yeah. So what were some of those assets you invested in to increase or to improve those channels of ordering, communication, engagement, profitability?
So, from an off-premise perspective?
Yeah, did you change your POS?
Yeah. Well, we actually did a whole revamp of our whole kind of tech stack and
that's what I'm looking for.
Oh, cool.
Operations. So what were the changes you made? And just aerial view. We don't need to dissect this.
Well, so these were, some of them were so I'll just tell you about the changes in general. Some of them were, well before COVID and some of them during, but we shifted to Toast.
Okay.
So new POS from Aloha, and that was a really good change. We were really happy with that. I think one of the COVID-related changes related to that is we they have a lot of order and pay remotely or without using a traditional menu or without a server necessarily. Yeah. And so we may or may not be tapping into some of those things down the road. Got you.
And Toast is an affiliate of mine. So if you guys are interested in Toast, I'm no longer offering the $1,000 cashback deal that I'm sending because my commission has changed. So I wouldn't make any money basically now if I did that. But if you are interested in Toast and you want to support the show, please use my links and make sure you email me personally. And I know what? Shoot, even if you email me personally, I'll still send you a check for $500 because you guys need it just as bad as I do.
There you go,
right
guys.
Now. So use my
it.
links. Please, pretty please, you're supporting the show. All right, so this is a question I ask all my guests before going into the speed round. We're almost wrapped up, but the mission statement, again, is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. How have you transformed in the past 11 years since starting your concept?
I mean, in so many ways, it's hard to sum up, but I guess the thing that comes to mind is kind of where we started, which is just with the team. And so it's not, it's, I guess, been consistent. So in a way, it's not at all the answer to the question, but we've just continued to put focus and emphasis on building the team and valuing the team and making sure that they feel that they're well compensated and well taken care of.
Yeah. And I think I love that. And a lot of people say this isn't the food business, this is the experience business. Right. And I would say this isn't the food business or the experience business. This is the developing and farming of people business.
Exactly.
And once you figure that out, once you know your job is to create the future of people and the replacements of yourself, that's when things start to change. It sounds like you guys figured that out.
I mean, that's where, so it's been somewhat consistent, but we've just gotten better and realized over time, how important that is. And
I love it. We're back. And the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Empathy.
What is your biggest weakness?
Operations.
What is one question you ask or thing you look for in the interview process when you are farming and growing your team?
What's your favorite food?
Ooh, what are you looking for?
passionate about their favorite food.
What is your biggest challenge today?
Finding exciting real estate.
What is one code of conduct or behavior that you teach your team? This is a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
Just simply treating people well.
I love it. What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your team? So this is something that's common within the four walls of your business, but not common throughout the industry.
Don't be scripted, which maybe isn't too unique, but
It's
to
good advice,
a
though.
growing concept, it's maybe
Yeah.
unique.
I hear a lot. It's framing. It's like be yourself within these parameters. Like
Yeah.
you got to touch on these things,
Smart.
but do it however you want. That's your rendition of those things. What is one book that's a must read to make us a better person or restaurant owner?
Oh gosh, I mean, the one that's coming to mind is probably one you get all the time, but it's Setting the Table. But I'm sure I have better ones, so I don't know.
It is a common
I
book.
may come back to you.
It
with
is a
that
great
one,
book.
but
Yeah. And that one is on Audible. Danny Meyer, Setting the Table, is on Audible. And if you guys are not using Audible, do you use Audible? Are you an audiobook listener?
Yeah.
Game changer.
yeah, it's
Is
great.
it not?
Yeah, no, I love it.
audibletrial.com/unstoppable. You're supporting the show when you're using that link, but more importantly, you're supporting yourself because we don't have the time and energy to sit down and read. But with audiobooks, you can be in your business working and learning. It's so powerful. It's a game changer. Name one service you've outsourced or hired. So this isn't necessarily a technology or a tool, but a person that does something really well that you're going to for their expertise to coach you in your business or to help you execute in your business.
Well, finance, accounting.
Okay. And who is that?
We have a firm called Okra that we work with in Denver, based
Beautiful.
in Denver.
Shout out to Okra. The whole purpose of this question is to help good people connect with good people. So
Cool.
thank you.
Cool.
What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Focus on systems and processes.
Yeah, for sure. And what is one technology that you've recently adopted that has had a huge impact on communication, efficiency, profitability, anything along those lines that you want to share with us?
I'll give a shout out to Lunchbox in this
Yes.
one. We started using them for online ordering, and they've been new company growing fast, and it's been good timing to be launching with them.
And I also noticed you use Zen Reach and Bento Box.
I love Zen Reach.
Okay.
And and I'm a fan of Bento Box too. Yeah.
So real quick, why Zen Reach?
One of our goals was capturing more guest data and being able to communicate with them, and they helped with that goal.
Awesome. And Bento Box has been getting a ton of love, past sponsor in the show as well. So website development, great tool.
Exactly.
All right, and this is the last question, man. You've
Cool.
been doing great. The last question is, if you got the news, it's a doozy, so get ready for it.
Okay.
If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and your legacy. What would they be?
3 pieces of wisdom to leave behind.
And what helps people with this question is, imagine you're leaving this wisdom behind to your kids. What would you want them to know? I know, I'm a jerk. This is a hard
I know,
question.
you're such a jerk. I mean, slow down, enjoy it, and, enjoy the time you have with, the people who are physically around you.
That's 1.
That's 3 wrapped in 1.
Okay, I'll take it. Awesome job, man. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. That's how I find the majority of my guests. Who do you respect and admire and would absolutely listen to the episode if you found out there were a guest on the show tomorrow?
So a guy that has been kind of a mentor to me in this industry is Adam Rosenbaum, who's the CEO currently of the Meatball Shop, and would be way more interesting to listen to on this podcast.
I am
myself.
aware of Adam. I have not gotten him on the show yet. I would love to make that happen.
Cool.
Thank you for calling him out. And if we want to come join your team, or maybe we have, I don't know, a question for you or whatever, what's the best way to connect?
Either Instagram or email, tk@mexicue.com.
Beautiful. And stick around to the end of today's episode. I'm not sure what episode number this is going to be. I'll have the episode number there for you so you can easily find this episode. Just go to restaurantunstoppable.com/episode number, and we'll link to all the tools, services, and how to connect with Thomas over there. And I just can't say thank you enough, Thomas, for taking the time and energy to share your story, your knowledge, and your mentorship. There is no questioning, my man. You are unstoppable.
Thanks, man. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Cheers.